Well, good evening from a very soggy London on a very momentous and difficult day. I'm sure that everybody's been following the news. My name is Lyn Julius, and I'm here to tell you a story of courage and resilience, maybe just the sort of story you need to inspire you on a day like today. So, who would you name as the greatest Jewish swimming champion of the 20th century? You might say Mark Spitz, who won 7 gold medals in the 1972 Munich Olympics. I've got him here on the screen on the right. But Spitz was not the first great Jewish butterfly swimming champion. And it seems appropriate in this year of the Olympics to tell you the remarkable story of Alfred Nakache, who is barely known in the English-speaking world. Alfred Nakache was born in 1915 in the city of Constantine in Algeria. He was one of 10 children. His Jewish family was traditional. Apparently, their roots were in Iraq. That's not surprising because both Iraq and Algeria, or most of Algeria, were under Ottoman rule, and it was not unusual for Jews to move across the Ottoman Empire. Constantine stands on either side of a gorge, with the river Rumel running through it. Algerian cities were populated by a mix of Jews, Muslims, and European settlers called Pieds Noirs. Algeria was ruled by France. In fact, it was more than a colony, it was considered part of France itself. In 1870, the Jews were granted French citizenship, although the Muslims were not. The Jews were caught between Muslim resentment because they thought Jews did not deserve to benefit from something they were denied, and the white settlers who thought that the Jews did not deserve to have what they had. All these communities rubbed along, but Constantine was later to be the scene of the worst riot in North Africa before World War II. This was in 1934, exactly 90 years ago. The riot was started by Muslims, but the Pieds Noirs were thought to have inflamed tensions, and the French forces of law and order delayed quelling the disturbances. In the end, 25 Jews were murdered, and there was much looting and destruction. But let's return to Nakache, who was growing up in Constantine in relative peace in the 1920s. Constantine was a city of athletes. The Pieds Noirs brought with them the boxing ring and the swimming pool. In fact, it had the oldest pool in North Africa, called Ain Sidi Messid. And here is a picture of it. Quite how Alfred came to be given swimming lessons is not altogether clear. But according to his brother Robert, Alfred was afraid of the water. Around the age of 10, with encouragement from his father, he manages to overcome his fear. Indeed, he takes to water like a duck. So he has an ungainly swimming style. Spotted for his physical stamina, Nakache is trained in the pool by 2 Frenchmen doing their military service in Constantine. After they leave, Alfred Nakache continues training himself, hence his unorthodox approach. At one point, he is disqualified in a race for straying out of his lane. Now, he is considered one of the pioneers of the butterfly swimming stroke, which actually only really developed in the 1930s. He had the build of a rugby player, obviously very strong upper body, and actually quite different from what you would expect from a swimming champion. Usually they're quite sort of slender and thin. But he was to make history as a butterfly swimming champion. So he takes part in local galas and moves to Paris in 1933 to teach at the prestigious Lycée Janson de Sailly. In the 1934 French National Championship, he places second in the 100-meter freestyle. And in 1935, he becomes the 100-meter French champion. He is one of 1,000 Jewish athletes to take part in the second Maccabiah Games in Tel Aviv in 1935, winning the silver medal in the 100-meter freestyle crawl. And he represents both France and Morocco. Alfred Nakache becomes a teacher of physical education, and he teaches swimming to young Parisians. In 1936, after some hesitation, the French government, which was the Popular Front, decides to send a delegation to the Olympic Games in Berlin in Nazi Germany. Nakache's team comes fourth in the 4x200-meter relay ahead of Germany. Most German Jewish athletes were banned, but several Jewish and Black athletes, like the famous Jesse Owens, who's the track and field athlete who won 4 gold medals, they defied Nazi racial theories, and they must have angered Hitler quite a bit, who was watching the races. The Berlin Olympics were actually a stepping stone for Nakache. He goes on to win the freestyle championship in France 6 times and the breaststroke 4 times. And this is a picture of his team at the Berlin Olympics. With war in the air, Nakache interrupts his training to join the French army. Here he is with his brothers, Roger and Prosper, and they serve for 10 months. He marries a sporty, and this is him in the water, a very playful sort of person. Look at him tweaking the nose of the man in the water. He, sorry, just go back a bit. He marries a sporty childhood friend, Paul Elbaz, in Paris, and she's also an Algerian Jewish competitive swimmer. Now, in 1940, the Vichy regime takes over in Algeria. Nakache, like all Jews, is stripped of his French nationality. The Vichy, that's all Algerian Jews. The Vichy regime enacts racist and anti-Semitic laws, the so-called Statut des Juifs, that mimicked and in some cases outdid those in Nazi Germany and its occupied territories. The racist laws expelled Jews from the public sphere and forced Jewish children out of public schools. It also established concentration, internment, prison, and forced labor camps in North Africa. After the Nazi invasion, France is split into two, and the pro-Nazi Vichy regime takes control of the so-called Free Zone, the southern half of the country. Nakache flees to Paris. Sorry, he flees Paris. In January 1941, he takes refuge in the Free Zone in Toulouse. There he joins the prestigious club of the Dauphin de Touques, the Dauphin of Toulouse. He assumes a teaching position there. In July 1941, he sets a world record, the first by a French swimmer, in a long seawater course in Marseille. The record stands for 5 years. And between 1941 and 1942, he earns 6 French national titles. While some press welcome the records broken by Alfred Nakache, others call for his exclusion from national competitions because of his Jewishness. This press cutting asks, is Nakache Jewish? If he is, let him be banned. And the anti-Semitic paper Le Pilori calls him a supernatural man, a half-god with frizzy hair and wide nostrils. The sports magazines Match and the anti-Semitic Revivre published the same cover of Nakache, and that's this one here, emerging from the pool with his tongue lolling to one side as if confirming Nazi racial theories. In Toulouse, Nakache helps the resistance by training new recruits and distributing anti-Nazi literature. He is protected by his club and his fame, but he's hiding in plain sight. Meanwhile, the Nazis and their collaborators are closing in on him. In July 1942, the French police detain and intern more than 28,000. Just a minute, I'll just see if I can find this. No, it's not there. Sorry. It's okay. If they can find, yeah, they detain more than 28,000 Jewish men, women, and children, and they hold 13,000 of them in the Vélodrome d'Hiver, the Veldiv, Paris's most famous indoor stadium. From there, the inmates are taken to the Drancy internment camp on the outskirts of Paris and then deported to Auschwitz. In August 1943, the French Swimming Federation banned Nakache from competition. Teammates from the Dauphin de Toulouse and a Tunisian team, surprisingly enough, known as ROT, forfeit a meet in Toulouse in protest, and fans demonstrate against Nakache's absence. And such public solidarity with a Jewish victim is rare in Europe. Ironically, he is scheduled to participate in a propagandistic sports tour of North Africa, sponsored by the Vichy regime. In autumn 1942, Nakache mounts the winner's podium under the watchful eye of the French military commander in Tunisia, General Barré, and Prince Mohammed Raouf Bey, son of the Bey of Tunis, Tunisia's dynastic head of state. Nakache returns to France. Under German pressure, the French Swimming Federation bans Alfred Nakache from participating in the 1943 championships in France. Excuse me. According to his brother Robert, Alfred Nakache tries to escape Toulouse. He seeks to cross the border into Spain with his wife and their daughter Annie, who's about 2 at the time. But Annie cries so much that the couple actually return to Toulouse for fear of endangering the group that they were traveling with. Let me just show you a picture of, this is Paul, who is Nakache's wife. They got married in 1939. And this is Paul and Annie. And we'll just go back a bit. On December the 20th, 1943, Nakache is heckled at his home, an apartment in Toulouse, and his apartment is plundered. Little Annie had been taken into hiding in a nursery. Alfred and Paul are arrested by the Gestapo and reunited with Annie. And there's a little story which I just came across, actually, that the carer who brought Annie to the station to be reunited with her parents, they were about to be deported to Drancy. She had with her Annie's favorite fluffy toy, a little dog. And when she tried to give it to Annie, the German officer said no, she couldn't give it to her. And this lady, who was about 85 when she was interviewed, said that she still remembers the German officer's name to this day. So the Nakache family are sent to Drancy, just outside Paris. Now, it is said that Nakache was denounced by a man who claimed to be his friend by reporting him to the authorities. And this is he. This man here, Jacques Cartonnet. Now, Jacques Cartonnet was a breaststroke swimming champion and rival to Nakache. Cartonnet was a virulent anti-Semite and a zealous member of the Milice Française, the French fascist militia. After the war, he was arrested in Rome and made a spectacular escape by jumping out of the aeroplane, taking him back to France. He is arrested once again by the Italians after hiding in a convent, and Italy refuses to extradite him in 1950. He is then jailed and remains in Italy until his death in 1967. But back in France, what was happening to Alfred and Paul and Annie? Well, they'd been arrested and detained in Toulouse's Saint-Michel prison, and he is charged with aiding the resistance. It was on the 26th of December 1943 that the Nakaches were taken to Drancy, where they spent a month together. And technically, they were not deported because they were Jews, but because they were foreign Jews, because as Algerian Jews, they had been stripped of their French nationality. And Annie obviously had been born in France, but she was considered foreign too. On the 20th of January 1944, the Nakaches are deported on convoy 66 from Bobigny to Auschwitz. The journey takes 29 hours. Out of the 1,153 deportees, 291 people are selected for forced labor. This would be the last time that Alfred would see his wife and daughter. Paul and Annie and the rest of the deportees are gassed immediately on arrival. Unaware of his family's fate, Alfred Nakache is prisoner number 172763. He is sent for forced labor. He's brought to Auschwitz Labor Camp 3 and then to the camp hospital. In Auschwitz, he befriends Victor Young Perez. See if I've got a picture of him. This is the Veldiv roundup in 1942, Auschwitz, and this is young Perez. So young Perez, sorry about this, was born in Tunisia in 1911, and he was the youngest world champion in the flyweight boxing category in 1931. Nakache also meets Noah Klieger, who was born in Strasbourg in France. Now, Klieger is an interesting character, and he survived Auschwitz to become a sports journalist in Israel. And he survived by a sort of fluke because he was suffering from pneumonia in Auschwitz and actually persuaded Mengele not to exterminate him. By luck, the SS officers were trying to assemble a boxing team, and Klieger joined that boxing team, even though he'd never boxed in his life. But there was an agreement that the professional boxers, or those who had experience of boxing, would let him deliver blows to them without actually absorbing any. So this was the sort of story that came out of Auschwitz, an amazing story of survival. Nakache also meets the great Italian Jew Primo Levi. So I just go back a bit. Yeah. So Nakache takes to swimming in the camp's water tank. The Nazis force him to swim in all weathers. The water tank smells putrid in summer. During the freezing Polish winter of 1944, the tank freezes over. And to humiliate Nakache, the Nazis make him retrieve objects such as stones and keys and even knives from the dirty water. And he comes up to the surface, clenching a knife between his teeth. And that's how he survives Auschwitz, because he puts on swimming lessons for a group of prisoners and even Nazi guards. As the Allies advance, he is forced on the death march to Buchenwald. Of 1,368 prisoners, only 47 survive. Young Perez, the boxing champion, dies on the march. One witness claims to have seen Nakache's grave, although no one was ever buried if they died on the death march. The French press declares that Nakache has died at Auschwitz, and Nakache's pool in Toulouse is even renamed in his memory. Alfred Nakache reaches Buchenwald. There he meets a man called Roger Fouché-Créteau, the brother of a swimmer he knew from Toulouse. With his help, Nakache puts pen to paper for the first time in 15 months. He writes how horribly alone he feels in Auschwitz, or he had felt in Auschwitz, and how alienated he felt as a non-Yiddish speaker. He writes, even our racial brother martyred us due to our ignorance of Yiddish. And he writes mournfully of the victims of his accuser and betrayer, Jacques Cartonnet, and of the vengeance due to the Nazis, whom he calls the barbarians. When he wrote these lines, he still did not know that his wife and daughter had been murdered. The camp is liberated on the 11th of April 1945. Originally weighing 80 kilos, he now weighs 40 kilos, and that's 88 pounds. Nakache arrives in Paris on the 28th of April 1945. In June 1945, Nakache confides to the magazine Ce Soir, I am readapting bit by bit, and I plan to settle down in Toulouse. I might go back to the gym I directed before my deportation. Physically, I am back in top form, but my spirits are still low. Every morning he goes and waits at Toulouse's railway station for Paul and Annie, but in vain. Less than a year later, he is competing again, shattered by the realization that his wife and daughter were not coming back, and helped by his friends and his trainer, Alban Mainville, Alfred Nakache gradually resumes his training and teaches physical education. After the war, the French Swimming Federation declares that politics and sport should never again mix. One can be cynical and say that this effort to move beyond the organization's dark wartime history was an attempt to reinvent France's record and portray the French as just victims and resistors. Nakache returns to competition at the highest level. In July 1946, he becomes French champion in the 200 meters breaststroke. He breaks the world record for the 3x100-meter relay medley with swimmers called Alex Jany and Georges Valeret. He swims for the French team in the Olympic Games in 1948 in London. He becomes the first Holocaust survivor to earn a place on an Olympic team and one of only two to ever do so. The other is Ben Helfgott. Ben might have been known to some of you. He was a Jewish weightlifter from Poland and a survivor of Buchenwald and Theresienstadt. And he won a bronze medal for Great Britain. In the 1948 London Olympics, Nakache reaches the semi-finals in the 200-meter breaststroke and plays in France's water polo team, which places 6th. He wins the French championships of the 4x200 and 3x100-meter relay races. Meanwhile, Israel is about to be declared and it's short of weapons. He's contacted by Abraham Polonsky, who's the Haganah leader based in France, and Nakache hides weapons for the future state of Israel in his gym. In 1950, Alfred Nakache marries for the second time. He marries a young girl from Set called Mary. He ceases his sporting career in the 1950s and devotes himself to his gym and his teaching. He also helps train a talented swimmer, Jean Boiteux. The good humor he was known for before the war returns, but he never forgives his erstwhile competitor, Jacques Cartonnet, who he believed had betrayed him and his family to the Gestapo. Cartonnet, as I explained, was a fugitive from justice. He was actually sentenced to death in absentia by the Court of Justice of the Haute-Garonne in March 1945. But of course, the Italians refused to extradite him. The year is 1961. Back in Algeria, the Constantine community was badly shaken by the murder of a prominent musician called Sheikh Raymond Leris, who was the father-in-law of Enrico Macias. For those who know Enrico Macias, he's a very famous singer in France. Algeria's war of independence threatens Jews and Pieds Noirs with a choice between suitcase and coffin. Almost the entire Jewish community flees. In Toulouse, Nakache takes in family, driven out of Algeria. Nakache's elderly parents cannot tolerate their uprooting and die soon after their resettlement in Toulouse. He spends 4 years teaching in the island of Reunion in the Indian Ocean. And he returns to France and he lives in Port Cerbère, which is just by the border with Spain, right on the Mediterranean. On the 4th of August, 1983, Alfred Nakache dies of a cardiac arrest. He dies in the water while taking his daily swim at Port Cerbère. He is about 100 kilometers from the city of his birth, Constantine, there. And he was just 67 or in his 68th year. Nakache's swimming pool was formally inaugurated as La Piscine Alfred Nakache in 2018. And there are several swimming pools named after him in France. His story has caught the imagination of theatre and film directors. There's a film made quite recently called Le Nageur by Pierre Assouline. And I found video clips about him. There are books about him, unfortunately, mostly in French. This is the huge Nakache pool at Toulouse, 50 by 150 meters. The Bey of Tunis awarded him the Order of Glory, and he has a place of honor in the Swimming Hall of Fame at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. But he was never decorated by the French state with the Cross of the Resistance Volunteer Combatant. That distinction would not only have been deserved, it would have come with a government pension. At his request, his gravestone not only bears his own name, but those of Paul and Annie. And you can see his second wife's gravestone there as well. So Alfred Nakache, a remarkable man, a swimming champion. He had 15 national titles under his belt. He broke 9 records for France, 3 European records, and 1 world record. He was a man remarkable for his resilience. He was also a very funny man. Apparently, he had a Charlie Chaplin sort of walk and a very funny laugh. He was playful. He loved to joke around. He loved children. He was very good with children. And he did not speak a lot about his ordeal during the war. And you would never have guessed that he had been to hell and back. So that's the story. I'll stop sharing, and if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. So just trying to find them. Yeah.
Hi, Lyn. I'm not sure there is any questions. Someone had
No questions, right?
I'm not sure.
Why did he go back to France after the war when it betrayed him? Well, that was his home. He went back home to Toulouse. It was, yeah, I mean, you don't know what he tried to rebuild his life, even though he was betrayed. He was betrayed by a particular individual, by Jacques Cartonnet. I mean, a lot of French Jews did go back to France after being deported. I don't think it's unusual. So thank you for your compliments. I know it's a difficult time for everybody, especially those in Israel at the moment. If there aren't any more questions, I'd just like to wish you Shana Tova. May we have a better year, a year of health and happiness and success. And if any of you are in Israel or have family in Israel, may they keep safe. And so I think that's it.
I think you've just got one more question, Lyn.
Oh, one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Can you just tell me what it is? Sorry, I'm having a bit
It says, how did Mr. Geek get persuaded to save a life?
How did
Mr. Geek get persuaded? I'm assuming, is that a typo? Get persuaded to save a life.
Get persuaded to save a life? Who did? Sorry. I'm sure.
It's a typo.
It's a typo.
M-E-N, Mengele.
Mengele. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, this was Noah Klieger's story. I think he just talked him into it. He's a remarkable guy. I suggest you look him up, Noah Klieger. I think he tried to make himself useful. I think this was the secret to surviving, actually. If you made yourself useful, and of course Nakache made himself useful because he was giving swimming lessons, and he was also entertaining the Nazis by diving into that water tank and retrieving objects. I mean, it was great entertainment for them. So the same went for Kliger. I think Kliger made himself useful. He was part of the boxing team, and he managed to, hoodwink Mengele, by claiming that he was going to be useful. So that was that. Are there any more questions?
No, just people saying thank you for an interesting lecture. That's
Okay, it's a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
As I say, Happy New Year to everybody.